Jack Marston, as far as we're aware, was the last surviving member of the Van der Linde's gang and continued on with a somewhat regular life in the earlier years of the 20th century. An Easter egg placed in Grand Theft Auto 5 shows us that he became a writer and published a novel titled simply Red Dead, with many believing that it told the tales of his life during his upbringing with the gang, the deformation of them, life on the Beach's Hope Ranch, and the death of his parents. But there's always been one question that's had players stumped. Who was Jack's real father? The obvious answer would be John Marston, but there are so many factors during the Red Dead Redemption series that may suggest otherwise, and today we're going to be delving into many potential theories in hopes of finding some answers. Welcome to the video. You're listening to Phil of Filthy Gaming. If you guys enjoy the following, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and aren't subscribed already, please consider doing so. Should you wish to get in touch, you can find the channel's Instagram page, which is displayed both on screen and in the video description below, or simply use the comment section provided. Without making this introduction too long, as we've got a lot to get through, let's get straight into today's content. Who was Jack Marston's real father? Abigail Roberts, Jack's mother, had spent much of her youth in saloons where she would entertain the patrons by playing the piano and singing. As she grew older, for whatever reason, Abigail would become a working girl. Everyone's favourite lumbago-suffering uncle would introduce her to the Van der Linde's gang when she was at the tender age of just 17, basically as a little fun for the males of the group. Although originally seen as an outsider and or associate to the gang, she would be welcomed in as part of the family. It wasn't long before Abigail would fall in love with Red Dead 1 protagonist John Marston and would soon become pregnant to him. John wanted no part of this, as he felt he wasn't ready for fatherhood and would continuously dismiss the idea that Jack was actually his child. The pressure got so much for him that when young Jack was still a baby, John would flee for around a full year, leaving not only Abigail and her newborn, but the Van der Linde gang itself. Although he would later see sense and return, being welcomed with open arms, something of which stung some of the more loyal members, he still refused to accept responsibility for the young boy, even after members such as Hosea Matthews, Arthur Morgan, and leader Dutch Van der Linde would pressure him into making more of an effort. He just didn't seem to want to know, believing Jack not to be his child. In total, there are just under 20 male members of the Van der Linde's gang, and as Dutch stated with the following quote,
"You know, gentlemen, this man here, oh, he married a whore. Used to ride with us. We all had her, oh, but he married her."
It's understandable why John would be at first skeptical as to whether Jack was indeed his, so let's take a look at every male gang member and the potential possibility of each one being Jack's biological father, other than John himself. There are a couple of subtle details that could place Arthur Morgan as Jack's potential father. For starters, after John leaves for a year, upon his return, Arthur is very unforgiving to him. Now, perspective would indicate this was because of Arthur's loyalty to the gang, and for the most part, this was certainly true. But are there deeper feelings towards this than we may not have first realised? We see quite often that Arthur doesn't just mention the fact of John's disappearance from the gang, but how he left Abigail and Jack behind too.
So how are things with you and John?
Fine.
Ain't it about time you let it go now?
It was a year, Hosea. He ditched us for a goddamn year.
I've spoken to him many times. He knows he did wrong. He just wants to put it behind him.
I'm sure he does. Running off on that kid is one thing, but there's a code. He knows that.
He later also takes Jack on a fishing trip, and when John berates him for this, he reacts sourly.
Why are you being so cagey about all this? Always playing some goddamn game.
Me? I ain't the one taking Jack on fishing trips.
No, you ain't. If you say the boy ain't yours, what's the difference? You probably only run off again.
Was this his way of using reverse psychology on John to pressure him into taking a responsibility that should have been Arthur's? Aside from that, there are a few other details that point the finger at Arthur. After said fishing trip, Arthur notes in his journal about Abigail, stating the following: "Took young Jack out as a favour to Abigail. Many years ago, before she fell so hard for that fool Marston, perhaps I should have married her. I think part of me has always thought that." He also goes on to praise both Jack and Abigail. This proves that he definitely had feelings towards her, but why shy away from the responsibility of it all? The following conversation with Rainsfall later in the game may provide answers to this.
I had a son once, years ago. Don't talk about him much.
Oh, what was his name?
Isaac. His mother, Eliza, was a waitress I met. When she got pregnant, she knew who I was, what my life was. I didn't want to promise nothing I couldn't keep, but I said I'd do right by them.
Let's keep moving. I want you to see this place.
Every few months, I'd stop by there for a few days. He was such a good kid. She was too, I guess. Just a kid, 19.
What happened?
I got there one day and saw two crosses outside. I knew right away. Turned out some bastards had come through. Robbed them. And shot them dead. And offered $10. It hardened me. Feeling that kind of pain.
Arthur was still hurt from the loss of his son and possibly didn't want to experience the heartache once more. Also, in his final days, he makes it his ultimate goal to make sure that John, Abigail and Jack all survive the downfall of the gang, and pushes John to become a better father and provider. In his final moments, is he wanting to ensure that the family enjoyed the life he was once afeared to provide them? Lastly, although it may seem a little far-fetched, when we take control of Jack in Red Dead Redemption 1, he's seen sporting a coat very similar to Arthur's gunslinger jacket. Is this Rockstar's way of teasing us to poke at potential theories? Next on our list is Javier Escuella. Javier fell in with the gang in the mid-1890s after both he and Dutch crossed paths attempting to do the same thing, steal chickens. Javier spoke no English and was beginning to starve. Dutch clothed him, fed him, and welcomed him into the gang. Because of this, Javier felt a great deal of loyalty to Dutch and would follow him into water. During our time in Red Dead Redemption 2, there aren't many interactions between Javier and Abigail, nor Jack, so was this Javier's way of separating himself from responsibility? John often complained to Javier about Abigail, to which Javier would have very little response.
I wish she would shut up. Excuse me. You haven't seen me.
Sheer bliss, hey brother?
Yes. Wonderful.
Is he not responding because he feels somewhat guilty that John is dealing with the responsibility that should have been his? One popular theory floating around is similar to Arthur's gunslinger coat that Jack wears in 1914, and that is the facial hair he sports. Javier has had the same goatee and mustache style for years, and if you inspect Jack as he enters adult life, he wears the exact same style. Although this may seem far-fetched, it could be a little hint implemented by Rockstar Games, giving us food for thought, so to speak. On top of this, in 1911, when John captures his former brother-in-arms, Javier immediately appeals to John's sensitive side, bringing up Abigail and Jack in an attempt to convince John to free him. After being captured, having exhausted all of his options, Javier turns aggressive when it comes to the topic of John's family.
Oh, one day I promise you, you're gonna regret this.
One day's about all you got left.
I hope you and your wife and children rot in hell.
You know that life we lived is over. And when we was living it, it didn't mean nothing anyway. It was just an excuse, and we all knew.
What I knew is that you was always a puto. And you're still a puto.
Is this because he now feels, as he's on his way to certain death, that he's angry with himself for allowing John to live a life that could have been his? A freedom to continue on after the fall of the Van der Lin's gang? There are others who could potentially be the father of Jack Marston, but in order to narrow the list down somewhat, let's cut out some impossibilities. Several members of the Van der Lin gang joined in late 1898, 6 months prior to the Blackwater ferry heist. These include Micah Bell, Charles Smith, Lenny Summers, Sean Maguire, and of course later Kieran Duffy. There are also some very unlikely characters, such as Reverend Orville Swanson, as he was an addict, Josiah Trelawney, as he already had a wife and children, Simon Pearson, as he seemed to have very little interest other than his cook station and getting drunk. Uncle, who although originally introduced Abigail to the gang, was a much older gentleman and not known for his hygiene, posing the question as to why Abigail would go anywhere near him, and Leopold Strauss, who was nothing more than the accountant and loan shark for the gang. So who do we have left? Although the year on which they formed with the Van der Lin gang, the exact time of the Calendar Boys is unclear. The pair, as told through conversations during our time in RDR2, were tough fighters who both loved to drink and gamble. There's not a lot of mention of any form of relationship between either Mac or Davy with Abigail, so it wouldn't be plausible to assume either was Jack's father. We never got to meet Mac, and although we only saw Davy very briefly during his final moments, even with Abigail looking of course upset at his passing, it's not a strong enough reaction to assume that he just lost his son's father. Bill Williamson would certainly fit the timeline, but this definitely wasn't his preference when it came to a sexual partner. Bill battles with his sexuality throughout his entire life, and it was about the worst kept secret in the Van der Lin's gang. Although sometimes the gang would poke fun at him for this.
Hey! There he is!
Watch where you're going! Take it easy,
Are you about to kiss that guy or punch him?
Oh, and we have our answer!
Well, Lenny and Jenny could never have worked. That's like Arthur and Martha, or Bill and Phil.
They didn't really seem to care about it. It wouldn't have made any sense for him and Abigail to have spent a night together. We could also dabble with the idea of the unnamed traitors of the gang, but considering we have absolutely no information on them, it's not something we can really put time into. We don't know what year they were with the gang, or when they were killed off. There's just too many holes to make a theory about them, although I suppose it's still possible. Or what about if Jack's real father was somebody outside of the gang itself? This could have been possible, as Abigail would sometimes sneak out, especially when the Pinkertons would turn up, but considering how much stock she'd put into the gang, again, this doesn't seem likely. So now, we really only have two left, with the exception of John Marston. Hosea Matthews, alongside Dutch Van der Lin, was a founding member of the gang. He was the reasoning behind most of the decisions that were made, the angel on the shoulder to oppose the devil of Dutch. It's no secret that he had a fondness for Abigail and his son Jack, often advising the mother on what to do in the best interests of her son. But was this because the child was his? Unlikely. Hosea was an ill man. We often saw him coughing. There's a theory that this was the original source to Arthur's tuberculosis, but that's a different story for a different day. It's more probable that he foresaw, much earlier than the others did, the upcoming downfall of Dutch, and wished to make sure Abigail got out before it was too late. He would often, just like the others, try to convince John to make more of an effort. I think Hosea simply wanted to make sure that Abigail and Jack were safe, and considering she was in love with John and believed he was the father, Hosea felt that escaping with him might have been their best option. He would often try to educate Jack, teaching him to read and fish, for example. This was more than likely to prepare him for what's ahead, as opposed to feeling guilty for not being the one raising him. The relationship between Hosea Matthews and Abigail Roberts was nothing more than a father to daughter to grandchild bond, as I believe that's how we perceive them. There was definitely a love between the three, but nothing untoward, so let's take a look at our final option. By the time 1899 had rolled around, the gang was becoming much larger than it originally had been, especially in the 6 months prior to the Blackwater ferry heist, but in the years before this, things were much more tight-knit. Although Abigail was brought into the group as not much more than a bit of recreation for the boys, for lack of a better term, Dutch decided to keep her on board. Was this possibly because she had learnt a little about the gang's doings, as it was simply more reassuring to keep a close eye on her as opposed to sending her on her way with all of the information she'd learnt? Or did he somewhat have a soft spot for her? Dutch had a history of that when partners became a little older, he would trade them in for someone younger, just as he did with Susan Grimshaw. So was this the thought process behind Abigail? Was she to be his new young flame? It's no secret that they no doubt shared time together, but as Abigail spent more time with the gang, she soon fell in love with John Marston, falling pregnant. Dutch may have saw this as an opportunity to pass the buck, feeling that Jack may have potentially been his offspring. We see him quite often try to reason with John, pressuring him into taking responsibility for the boy. He could have used his silver tongue to convince Abigail that although she's been intimate with the other gang members, that John must certainly be the father, using her love for John as a tool to aid him. Abigail certainly looked up to Dutch, as she'd never really been part of her family before, making it easy for him to manipulate her thoughts. Even after John disappeared all that time, Dutch kept Abigail and young Jack around, having the family take care of them both. Why would he care so much for somebody who is considered not much more than entertainment, unless he felt he had somewhat of a responsibility to aid their child, passing the duty of fatherhood onto someone else, but in close enough proximity that he would still be part of the child's life? There are positive and negatives to these theories today, and that's just what they were, theories. Whoever the biological father of Jack Marston is, whether it be Arthur, Javier, Hosea, Dutch, or any of the others, at the end of it all, when he finally stepped up, John Marston was the one to take on the responsibility of the child. Although the other gang members all had a part in Jack's original upbringing, it was ultimately John who became his father. So to answer the question that titled this video, who was Jack's biological father? It doesn't matter. John was the one who took him from childhood to adulthood. Even though they had a somewhat rocky start, primarily due to John's lack of responsibility, he stepped up during the middle chapters of Red Dead Redemption 2, especially after the young boy was kidnapped. It was around this time that he truly realised how much he cared for Jack and vowed to protect him and his mother at all costs. By the time we reach the epilogue of the game, Jack has very few memories of his time in the gang due to his young age. He remembers small portions, but the person he became as we watched him grow was mainly down to the upbringing he received from John Marston and his wife Abigail. If you guys enjoyed today's video, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and aren't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, as we're almost at the huge milestone that is 10,000 subscribers. There were a couple of clips today that I unfortunately couldn't obtain myself, so the original creators will have been credited on the screen and their channels will be linked below. Their channels are something I highly recommend if you're a fan of RDR2 content. Should you wish to get in touch, you can find my Instagram page both on screen and in the video description, along with any other social medias you may need. Be sure to let me know in the comment section provided your thoughts on today's theories, and if you have any of your own that you wish to expand on yourself, please feel free to do so. Thank you all for watching. You've been listening to Phil of Philby Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.